moving a little bit later into the life of Paul and of Barnabas, there comes a division between them.
Right.
And it's over this man called John Mark. Anyway, Acts chapter 15, verses 36 through 41, we hear this confrontation between them. They're divided. The scripture says there's a sharp disagreement that arose among them. And it was over this young man who had withdrawn from them and apparently just went home. He didn't go on to do the work with them. Basically, he didn't do what he had signed up for. He dropped out of, the mission trip, basically. Gave up and went home.
And by the way, that happens a lot today. We look at John Mark and we blame him for this stuff, but that happens to people. We get homesick. I don't know. I just don't. I want us to understand that this is not about John Mark. That this is because what he did is totally understandable.
Oh, absolutely. And something too that we might not realize is, even when you have an encourager, he was with the son of encouragement.
Right.
But even though he was with the encourager, there was still something. And we don't know what it is. Perhaps he received news of a loved one who had an illness or was sick or something. And, there are lots of different things that it could have been.
Right.
But nevertheless, they have this disagreement over John Mark. And Barnabas says, we need to take him. They know that they need to go back. Paul says, we need to go back. We need to visit these places where we were carrying the gospel. We need to check up on them. We need to follow up and encourage them and, make sure that they're staying steadfast.
Right.
And Barnabas says, well, I want to take John Mark. And they split.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of a hard topic, I think, when you think about it. You've got, these men that are doing the work of God. That's their goal. But they have this disagreement, and they split.
Yeah. Well, and I have heard this passage used as justification for church division, and I think that is sad.
Yeah.
Because that's not at all what's happening. Paul and Barnabas are going out into the world. They're not like, all right, we have a north side church and south side church, and we're split because Paul and Barnabas split. And that's not what's happening here. What's happening here is Barnabas is standing up, and that's the other thing, and you said it earlier, encouragers also know when to stand up.
Right.
And whatever it was, Barnabas saw something in John Mark, and he was like, we're not going to ignore this. We're not going to hurt this kid. And that's something that's interesting. And if we were to do a case study on Paul, we would see that Paul can be kind of hard-headed sometimes.
Oh, yes.
And that Paul has a short fuse.
Yeah.
And that's okay. But and that's why Paul and Barnabas worked together so well.
He withstood Peter
Barnabas
to the face.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But Barnabas had this long fuse, and he was patient, and he was going to tell people that it's going to be okay. He's going to encourage them. When we look at this situation, that's exactly what's happening, is that John Mark probably was really down on himself. And I don't know how he came about to talking to Barnabas, but it was like, hey, let's do this. And Paul didn't want any part of it.
Right.
But the encourager is going to stand up and say, we need to help this person. And that's what Barnabas was all about.
Right. And it's not necessarily the case that Paul just gave up on him.
Correct.
It was, you don't give up on people. But the idea is that they're going back to those same places. Mm-hmm. For whatever reason, it could cause a hindrance. If we go back to even, I believe it's in Acts chapter 7, where the apostles are, they're being confronted with every little problem in the church. And, they say, it's not right for us to serve tables when we're, supposed to be preaching and offering prayers. We're supposed to be doing this ministry, but they were impeded.
Right.
And so Paul, I'm sure, was just thinking, we cannot have something that's going to impede us in this ministry.
Right.
And so he's thinking of, how are we going to do this in the most effective way to encourage and lift up, and if we have issues again, it's going to hinder us. And so he's not
Correct.
necessarily, against the person of John Mark.
Right.
He is into the work of ministry, and Barnabas just saw it in a different way. Both of them are at work in the ministry. And so what happens is Paul takes Silas, Barnabas takes John Mark, and they go and do what they had planned to do. Right?
Right.
So,
And the ministry is doubled.
right. And so it's not even, like you said about like a church split or something like that. I mean, it's not that they are split and they don't talk to each other and they don't have any relationship with each other. They do the work, and they're still doing the work together in a sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But even though it's not together,
Well,
they still have the same task.